the worst I hate to break it to you moment you had with someone? Story 1. I had a guy working for me that was extremely nice, easy to get along with, and wildly inept. Not even like low effort, but just not capable of learning seemingly basic tasks. We tried everything: coaching, giving him legitimate checklist instructions, having a team lead sit with him for a couple weeks to walk him through basics, everything. Everyone said the same thing. He just couldn't do the job. Everything he did had to be double-checked by somebody else, which meant that we might as well have somebody else do it. But everyone liked the guy. They thought he was easygoing and cool to be around, everything. But still, he just straight up couldn't do that job. So I had to find another place for him in the company that would better match his skills. The option would be for him to either take the lower job with lower pay, or he would be fired with severance. I was not looking forward to the conversation. I called him in for a one-on-one to break it to him, and the first thing he started with was, "Hey boss, before we start, I just want to tell you that I really feel like I've been doing a great job here and I would like to talk about a raise." Yeah, that conversation was not a fun one. Story 2. I had to tell my friend that the online girlfriend he'd been talking to for months was actually a scammer using stolen photos. He was planning to send her money to come visit, and breaking the news to him was one of the toughest conversations I've ever had. Story 3. I used to work in a customer care call center for a major telecommunications company. A woman called in one day to inquire about $2.99 charges on her bill from Lava Life. She kept pressing about the charges, what they were, and I had to explain to her that Lava Life is a dating service and that the charges were legitimate. If she didn't make them, did someone else live in her house who might have? There was only her husband, and I heard her go from, "But he would never," to "I have to go now" as it set in. That was almost 20 years ago now, and I still feel awful about it. Story 4. There was a rule at my job where only one of these two supervisors could be off at a time. One of them loved to take a full week off work during holidays to get more bang for his PTO buck. One year, he had Thanksgiving week off, but the other supervisor had family come to town that week on late notice. The other supervisor asked him to cancel just one of his days so she could spend the day with family. He declined, even after she basically begged him, and he even said he didn't have anything to do that day. She then proceeded to take PTO days every Wednesday of a holiday week for the next calendar year, effectively blocking him from taking his cheap weeks off. He told me that he thought it was funny because he knew she didn't have enough time to take all those vacation days off, and she'd eventually have to cancel some of them. I gotta tell him, I hate to break it to you, but she only took 2 hours off each of those days. See, the rule didn't differentiate between a partial or whole day, so she only had to burn 24 or so hours to block him. He looked devastated. It was kind of petty on both of their parts, but I give her credit for being creative in her retribution and don't blame her a bit for what she did. Story 5. My best friend in high school was overweight and would sweat profusely. We would come in after lunch in Texas and he would smell awful. I think he would wear his clothes without washing them after sweating. We had English after, and the AC sucked, so teacher put a fan in the window. He would sit in front of the fan and blow his funk over everyone. The class got together and voted that I should be the one to tell him. Well, I had to break it to him that for the last year, he has smelled horribly. I felt pretty bad, but he never stunk again. Story 6. Not me, but I went to visit my dad at his job, and he has an employee there who was kind of bragging to his other coworkers about how well he has been doing at the job and thinking of asking for promotion. My dad later told me that he fired that guy later that day due to poor performance despite multiple attempts to help him LOL. Story 7. I had an upper management type guy try to explain to me in a very condescending way how a specific device works and how to install it. All completely wrong. I wrote the manual for it. I own the patent. It's named after me. Story 8. I came back from my first day of finals in my first semester of college to find 2 women in suits and a campus police officer waiting for me. The women were mental health counselors from the university. One of them tried to talk to me but started crying. The other one couldn't say anything either. It was finally the cop who told me that someone had broken into my mother's house that morning and murdered her, my mom. Story 9. Oof. Definitely the time I had to tell a friend that the business opportunity he was so excited about was actually a pyramid scheme. He was so hyped, talking about how he was going to quit his job and be his own boss. I tried to ease into it, but there's really no soft way to say, "Hey man, you're about to lose a lot of money and ruin your friendships." Story 10. My sister-in-law. My niece plays field hockey, and I love her. She plays in 2 different leagues, meaning it's 3 hours of field hockey games every Saturday and Sunday. My SIL expected me and my husband to drive an hour one way both days to watch niece play and pay rapt attention the whole time. Did I mention the games are at 7 a.m.? We did this about once a month on either Saturday or Sunday, and I guess this wasn't enough for her. We had to tell her that we loved niece, but we weren't going to be as involved as she was in the league. Story 11. When I got the call that my mom had passed, they wouldn't say that she had passed or that she had died. They kept saying medical things like, she doesn't have a pulse, she is not breathing, etc. It took a long time to understand that they were saying she was gone and that it was final. Story 12. Had a friend ask me about some green sign in the distance. It was in fact a sodium vapor sign, giving off an intense orange light which sodium vapor is known for. Had to tell him right there that he was colorblind. He was in his mid-30s too. A lot of odd things that had happened in his past fell into place for him that day. Story 13. 15 years ago, my friend's father sadly passed away shortly after we graduated college. It was devastating for him. He figured he'd at least get a nice money boost to help him get back on his feet. But unfortunately, his father kept it a secret that he was deep in debt and had no liquid cash to his name. My friend had no support and fell into a terrible depression. He was broke. He couch crashed with me and our friends for a while. He quit his job, and he got comfortable with this new lifestyle. 2 years later, he's still spending a month here and there with various friends around the city, eating their food, occupying their couch, sipping off their booze cabinet, using the terrible tragic passing of his father as his reasoning for being the way he was. It had been 2 years. We understood the pain he felt was real, but it was really time for him to actually get back on his feet and taking care of himself. We didn't know how to explain it to him, but we all felt he was taking advantage of us and was using his father's death as an excuse to just not get a job. I found him a job, a nice one he would be good at, he went to school for, and didn't need prior work experience. I talked to a team lead and an HR rep and got him a contact line for them, basically assuring an interview and a job offer if he arrived on time and sober. Weeks later, my HR rep and this team lead were confused, thinking I didn't relay the information to him. He never called. I gave him a layup of a job opportunity and he just ignored it outright. I called him out on it, but he told me to calm down and chill out and that I wasn't being sensitive to his depression and I wasn't understanding of his needs. So my worst I hate to break it to you moment wasn't actually with him. It was with all my friends afterward. I had to tell them all to turn him down every time he asked to stay a week at their place. It sucked. The timing and my response to his refusal would give it away. This guy knew I was the horrible who turned all his friends against him and denied him free room and board. I was probably going to be the sole reason he'd blame for his inevitable descent into homelessness. I accepted the burden and called them up, explaining I had a job lined up for him and he refused, and we must all stop giving him a free place to stay if he won't take an easy job. Yes, it sucks his dad died. And it sucks he didn't get any kind of inheritance to start his life proper. It sucks he felt this terrible depression that lingered for years. And most of all, it sucks he had a group of enabling friends like me who humored it for so long, it just became his accepted norm. We failed him. He didn't end up homeless, though. Without us offering his jobless butt a couch to crash on anymore, he ended up moving in with his aunt. Apparently, she didn't take his excuses, didn't put up with his laziness, and did all the things we should been doing all along. No booze allowed. No weed. No gaming after she went to bed. She only had one TV in the house and it was for Food Network only. He got a job developing 3D assets for VR titles and started moving up and up creating VR experiences for architecture companies. Dude still hates me probably, and he'll admit I made mistakes to justify it, but I'm really grateful his aunt was there. I did what I needed to do, but it would have been even 10 times worse if he did end up living on the streets, still blaming his father's sudden death for his 2-decade-long predicament. Story 14. Freshman year of college, a friend said that he was going to go barefoot as much as possible to toughen up his feet so that his future kids would be born with tough feet too. Had to explain to him why that wouldn't work and the basics of genetics. He didn't believe me and stuck with his theory. We have since lost touch, but I know he had a son a few years ago. I'll have to ask him if it worked out. Story 15. Having to tell AI, a student who was almost totally blind, that she likely couldn't be an ER nurse. She and her dad moved to our district. And at the IEP, her dad starts talking about how he can't wait for Sue to go to nursing school. I frantically scanned my brain, trying to think of how someone who was going to need Braille would be able to do that job. Then Sue piped up to say that her dream was to be an ER nurse. Her prior district told her she could do anything, including this. She had a degenerative disease that would eventually make her blind. I talked to my friends who are nurses. I talked to our career lady at the school. I researched, but there just wasn't any way someone who couldn't see could be an ER nurse. I reconvened the IEP and had to explain this. I know both were in denial, but I was not happy that the prior district pumped up this idea. I mean, sure, there is lots she could still do, but that just wasn't one of them. Then, another student came from the same district with the idea she could be a CSI investigator. She was also nearly blind. Story 16. Not me, but my ex. A couple years ago got a job as a cook working at a big hospital. They had a mostly set and reoccurring cycle of dishes items in Golden Corral-style stations around the cafeteria. Basic food, dressed up, or pre-prepped. Nothing too fancy. His first month, he became familiar with some of the residents' doctors who would make small talk and shoot the with him as he loaded up their plates. One of these doctors was a man originally from India, who was very enthusiastic about the country fried chicken smothered in pepper gravy. He said it was his favorite dish out of anything else there, and it wasn't uncommon for him to stop by at the end of his shift to purchase extra to take home. My partners. First time working the entree station, the doctor pointed and asked my partner for his usual country fried chicken. My partner stared at him confused. They didn't serve country fried chicken, but they do have chicken fried steak. When he nonchalantly informed the doctor of this, the man's eyes went wide. He looked genuinely shocked. This isn't chicken? My partner described the expression on his face as going from jarred and baffled to so sad when he realized he had been eating beef this entire time, but also that it had tasted so delicious. Apparently, despite eating other types of meat, the man was still deeply tied to his Hindu roots and avoided beef in his regular diet because of this. The previous cook before him had mistaken these ambiguous meat patties smothered in thick gravy for chicken, so wires got crossed, and he then relayed that incorrect information to the doctor. I still cringe when I think about this. X felt so sad he had to be the one to tell him. Story 17. Had to tell my mom that my grandma, her mom, had died and been buried a month before. My mom had been in a COVID-related coma for 6-ish weeks during that time. At one point, they were actually in the ICU, in beds beside each other. Neither ever knew, so yeah, that sucked. Story 18. My primary care doctor who told me I have anxiety and exaggerate my health symptoms. When I got to tell her I saw an endocrinologist on my own, luckily with my insurance I didn't require a referral and was diagnosed with an autoimmune disorder. Story 19. My ex-wife tried to commit suicide twice in 1 week. The second time, she was committed to a psych ward. Her mother decided to come over and help with the kids and household chores. The second day she is at the house, she comes out of the bedroom disoriented. Turns out she is having a stroke. For the third time that week, I had to call 911. I had to go to the psych ward and tell my suicidal, drugged-up wife that her mother, who she was very close to, was in the hospital because she had a stroke. Story 20. I once had to tell a friend that the homemade cookies she proudly brought to a party were just repackaged store-bought ones we all recognized. The look on her face was priceless. But we still love her. Story 21. I was crossing the road at Great Portland Street when I heard a screeching of brakes. I turned around to see a dude flying through the air. It all happened in slow motion. I got to him quickly and checked him over. He said, "I'm going skiing tomorrow." I said, "No, you're not." As I found the bottom half of his leg was snapped clean in half. Had to phone his wife and break the news. Story 22. It's part of my job, but telling a couple their 15-day-old had died overnight and was not able to be resuscitated. Those screams are a sound you can never scrub out of your brain. Story 23. I had an employee who was a strict vegetarian for religious reasons. One day, we were discussing the employee salad bar, and he mentioned how much he loved the Caesar dressing packets they offered. I was surprised and stupidly blurted out, "Oh, I didn't realize you ate fish." He responded that he was vegetarian and gave me a quizzical look. I had to explain that the salad dressing contained both fish and Parmesan cheese, which is almost always cultured with animal rennet. He didn't believe me, and the next day, insisted on reading the ingredients on one of the packets to me to prove to me that I was wrong. Then he got to the anchovies and got quiet. I still feel awful that he had to find out that way. Neither of us handled the situation well. Story 24. My uncle called me to ask where my mom was. I told him she went to look at my grandfather's body. Apparently, he didn't know his father had passed yet. That was pretty awkward. Story 25. Had a friend who was deployed. His girlfriend got into drugs in the dealer. I was over the dealer's house and saw a video of him, her in the shower. Went home, called my friend and described the situation as if it happened to someone else, asking if I should inform the person. He unequivocally told me I should, so I told him the story was about him. He thanked me and said he'd deal with it. They are currently married, actually going pretty strong. Story 26. I found out my friend's girlfriend had Hep C. Her cousin told me she had it and she was not going to tell him. No one else would tell him, so I called and told him. It was Valentine's Day. Awkward. Story 27. A friend of mine unironically thought that he was the first person ever to experience existentialism. He literally said that no one ever talks about how small we are in the grand scope of the universe, and kept saying that no one else ever wants to talk about the meaning of life. I felt too bad to explain to him that the concept of how small we are in relation to our world has literally been one of the backbones of philosophy for centuries. Story 28. I was doing a phone port with ATT, and when we got done, the ATT guy say, "All right, man, have a good weekend." I replied back with, "I hate to break it to you, bud, But it's only twos. I heard him actually sigh and say under his breath. Story 29. Sisters. A victim of her own impulsivity. She really likes new cars and will roll negative equity into a new car. Then she'll get bored of it, stop maintaining it, trade it in for a loss, and have an even bigger loan. And this was back when loans were pretty much free and they could finance anybody. So she called me up all excited because she found a new truck, got approved for financing, and was on the way to go buy it. So I went to meet her there, big V8 full-size pickup truck. For a woman working part-time and living in a congested city. Why do you want this? My kids need a place to transport their bikes, and I want to go camping. So I drove it with her. Salesman was doing everything in his power to make the sale. And fair enough, he's not a financial advisor. He doesn't need to deal with the fallout. But right there in the showroom, I had to tell her that, look, this is an awful idea. You can't afford this. It's going to be a huge burden on you, and you need to walk away. Thankfully, she did. Salesman would have punched me if he could have gotten away with it. He was seething mad. Story 30. I was at a tech entrepreneurial meetup back in 2012. I spoke with one guy who was enthusiastically describing his billion-dollar idea, an app that people at the gym could use to track their workouts and do challenges. He said there was even a social media potential because people could share their progress. You mean like Strava? I asked, thinking he had perhaps identified a niche market not covered by Strava, Endomondo, and others. I got a confused, "What?" in response. He'd never heard of it. The look on his face when I showed him the app and he saw that his idea had been thoroughly realized for some time was tragic. How he had gotten as far with his idea as he had without finding any existing apps is a mystery to me. Story 31. Back around 2007, I had an older colleague who was excitedly flitting around the office telling everyone about some lottery she had won, and that she was going to quit just as soon as the 100,000 cleared in her account. Mary was only in her 50s, so still years away from retirement. On top of that, she was an administrative assistant at a nonprofit, so we're not talking about a lucrative career where she was squirreling away funds for a rainy day. And here she was, ready to resign a decade early over a sum that would only be worth a few years of salary after taxes. Did I mention that there was talk of a fur coat? I would have normally kept my mouth shut. After all, her poor financial planning was none of my business and, frankly, I would not have missed her in the office. I was not a fan. I just couldn't be silent once she got to my office, though. It was obviously a scam. I'm not trying to rain on your parade, but are you absolutely sure this is legit? Oh yeah, I already gave them my banking information and everything. They're depositing the money today. You may want to call your bank just to be sure. No, it's fine. Okay, congrats. Dear reader. Not even an hour later, I hear her screeching into her phone that, no, don't close my account. They're supposed to be depositing the money. Depositing. No, depositing. No, they're not taking it out, they're putting it in. My office mate and I just looked at each other like Mary didn't say anything to anyone about the fraud. ETA. The bank calling her as a security measure saved her from getting cleaned out. The scammers didn't actually get her money. Epilogue. About a year later, a bunch of us, Mary and myself included, were laid off at the beginning of the recession. I didn't like Mary, but I didn't wish her unwell. I can only imagine how much harder it was for her to find work than us 20 and 30-somethings who lost our jobs. I know the people laid off were cherry-picked based on who the founder didn't like. Question a process? List. Do anything other than cheerlead the founder's ideas? List. Run around the office talking about quitting? Mary absolutely landed on the list that day. She had been one of the first employees the org ever hired, and just like that, she was disposable, having to tell people that they are literally smelling so bad they are excused from work to go home to shower and put on clean clothes. Then they can come back to work, more than once, to the same people. Story 32. My friend has been constantly complaining about her husband. I visited them for a couple of weeks, and I had to break to her that she is the problem, like massively so. I genuinely felt sorry for her husband by the time I left. The man gets both verbally and emotionally abused constantly. I told him he should report her to the police if she ever hit him again, because honestly, the situation is completely out of control. Even more out of control than she is, she needs a couple nights in jail to rethink her choices TBH. Story 33. My Emil swears she made a deal with the devil to have a son my husband. I asked how, and she said she bartered his soul so I need to take him to church and save him. I informed her his soul didn't belong to her, and you can't barter a soul that doesn't belong to you. You can only barter your own soul, so the soul she sold was her own. I mean, the whole thing is batshit crazy, but she had a full meltdown about it. Story 34. An employee confided in me that she contracted gonorrhea and was talking about how she got it from the toilet seat at work because she is monogamous with her husband. I was like, girl, he ain't monogamous with you. Story 35. Recently, a friend on Facebook mentioned how she was pro-life but still thought women had the right to choose. I had to break it to her that if that's her stance, she's pro-choice. She deleted the post. Story 36. I told a gentleman with acute mesenteric ischemia that it was going to kill him. He told me that he'd had a good life, and if it was going to kill him in the next year or so, then he could accept that. I said, this will kill you today, within the next 24 hours or so. Story 37. I was traveling for work in Australia. Let's say I was commuting between Perth and Sydney, and back again. The back again flight was at stupid o'clock, requiring me to get up at 3 a.m. to leave at 4 a.m. to be at the airport by 5 a.m. I was groggy and moving on autopilot. I stopped to buy a coffee at an airport kiosk and the barista asked me, "Where are you flying to today?" I sleepily replied to Sydney, and the guy looked stunned. He said, "I hate to break it to you, but you are in Sydney." Story 38. A very long time ago, I had two buddies who were both pretty well on equal footing with me, two of my best friends. One of them started the other one's girlfriend. That was rough. I wrestled with it for a long time, and my decision to tell the victim ultimately led to losing the other one as a friend. Much as that sucked, I still say it was the right thing to do. Story 39. It's always telling parents that their kid sucks at the sport they're doing. The parents drop and run and never see what the kids are doing at workouts, and then, when the kid gets cut from the top team, they complain with like, "But I dropped them off 6 times a week for the whole season." And I hit them with the, "I hate to break it to you, but turning up is not the same as actually working out." Story 41. Had to tell my uni housemate his girlfriend, my other housemate, had left him and was currently hooking up with another guy. 2. That the Roman numerals my cousin had gotten tattooed were in fact not the date of her child's birth. 3. I had to tell my dog that just because I'm eating something, he doesn't also get to eat some of it. And as it had chocolate in it, it would actually make him sick if he did. That one was difficult. Story 41. About a decade ago, I was having dinner with friends and we were all sharing crazy partying stories. One friend said that a few weeks before that, she witnessed a drunk girl chasing her crush around, frantically trying to kiss him or him. The poor guy kept telling her to stop, but she wouldn't have it. Some of the drunk girl's friends even joined in. They tried to undress the guy and would not let him leave. Eventually, the guy managed to escape and ran back to his car. My friend was telling that story as if we were supposed to laugh. But at one point, we gently broke it down to her that she had witnessed attempted rape, and the fact that the victim was a man was not an excuse. My friend's face changed as the horror of what she had seen dawned on her. Story 42. A co-worker of mine doesn't know the difference between type 1 and type 2 diabetes. My child has type 1, and he's upset that it's a disease we created and will she grow out of it. 1. Type 2 is one that we created because people eat too much sugar oversimplifying. 2. No, she won't grow out of her pancreas not making insulin. Story 43. My current project manager, Wed, been selecting a new software for almost a year, and was in the meantime assorted to a more boring project. After a year, we'd finally kicked off, and about a week in, she took me into a meeting room apart. There's been a merge. The project is called off. Story 44. I lived with a roommates and we got a new sublet of some guy they all knew. The guy's girlfriend of 5 years wanted to take a break. Everybody in the house said she had clearly wanted it dump him for a while. The guy moved in, and I become friends with him. He definitely thought they were getting back together, but he got depressed and drank a lot. One night he tells the housemates and I that he cheated on her a few times and even slept with his ex-GF on and off the first year they dated. Yikes. She, his new ex, was an absolute bombshell. Could have easily been a model. The kind of face you could just stare at. Unreal looking. But she was a total little Miss Princess. Real self-centered type, but a lot of fun to party with. She still hung around with the overall group of friends and my roommates. One night, everybody was drinking together when her ex wasn't around. Somebody brought up cheating and she started laughing. Someone was curious why she found it funny. Her, "It's just not something I have to worry about. I'm too attractive. Nobody would cheat on me." Story 45. Co-worker, lamenting her relationship with one of her older daughters. She said it started fracturing when new husband-boyfriend came into mom's life. Not thinking, I asked if he hurt the daughter. She was adamantly opposed, but turned introspective. Next week tells me she confronted daughter and turns out I was correct. Coworker took a new job away from me 4 months later, after being at that job for 25 years. Story 46. My superior, a bank VP, told me to fire my subordinate because he's always snapping his fingers when he walks, and he knows it drives everybody crazy. She said, if I don't do it, she'll fire both of us. This was decades ago. Laws were mere suggestions then. I took him to lunch and let him pick the restaurant. After eating, as we were pushing our empty plates to the center of the table, I just blurted out, "Ken, you're fired." "Yeah, I know. Is it about the snapping thing?" "Yeah, you knew this was coming?" "Yeah, I told them my ankle pops for a few steps if I sit still for a while," he says. He gets up and walks around the table, and I can hear this loud pop, pop, pop. I told him, I guess she doesn't believe you. He smiled and said it was okay. He'd already accepted an offer somewhere else, and he knew this was coming. A couple of years later, Ken's boss reached out and headhunted me, and Ken and I got to work together for a few years. Great guy. Loud ankles. Story 47. Normally, I sport a beard mustache. However, I was doing a show where I had to change it to a Fu Manchu-type mustache. I came into work, and one of my co-workers said to me, I hate to break it to you, Cam, but you have a centipede on your lip. Story 48. I had to tell a friend that her vagina smelt. I felt so bad for her as she was so embarrassed, but a few of the guys she had been sleeping with had been spreading rumors, so I thought it best to come from me than anyone else IDK. Story 49. Telling my college composition class that the plural of Jones is Joneses. As in, look, there go the Johnsons and the Joneses walking down the street. In English, you add s or es to make plurals of regular nouns, houses, chairs, classes, etc. But proper nouns names don't have a special rule, they're like all other nouns. So one Smith, several Smiths, one Garcia, several Garcias, one Miller, several Millers, one Jones, several Joneses, one Davis, several Davises. Some of my students just about lost their minds, which was fairly hilarious to watch. They still wanted to use apostrophes, which turns the nouns into possessive adjectives, because you don't make plurals by using apostrophes. Note that apostrophes is plural, with no apostrophe. Story 50. Not me, but I was there for it. After a family wedding, my dad and some of his cousins he hadn't seen in years were at my parents' home drinking beers and catching up. As they were laughing about an old story from being kids, my dad asked one of the cousins how his little brother is doing, because they hadn't talked in a few years. The room got so dead silent instantaneously that we could tell something was very off. The cousin he asked about with the brother got choked up, and another cousin awkwardly told my dad that the brother had died the year prior. Turns out my entire family was aware and had all gone to the memorial and been notified. My grandma somehow failed to realize nobody had informed my parents, so it was literally only my family that had no clue. Nobody even really shared about it on social media, so it was just a complete shock to us. Story 51. I was the one being braked to. In university, I was with a group of classmates and briefly ranted about how annoying it was when people recorded and posted countless, seemingly infinitely long video clips of concerts they attended. Awkward silence, then two of the people there jokingly said they felt a bit personally attacked, chuckled and said something like, I want my friends to be able to see many different parts of the concerts, but I don't regret anything. Stand for what I said and weren't close to anyone there. Story 52. I lived in a shared flat in 2012. Me F, another woman, and a guy. I came home from work at about 6 p.m. and heard an unmistakable sound coming from the guy's bedroom. No matter how much I convinced myself it could be something else, I knew it was the sound of spanking coming from his room. I'm pretty liberal, but it feels uncomfortable listening to that when you just want to unwind from work and have your dinner. My female flatmate was very conservative and came to me saying, she'd regularly heard the spanking. It was freaking her out, and I needed to deal with it. Why should I deal with it? Deal with it I did. I cornered Spanky Man flatmate in the kitchen, and I said boldly, this is rather awkward, but I need to talk to you about the loud spanking in your bedroom. He replied with the immortal line, oh, that? Well, it's not what you think it is. I'm not spanking women in there. They're spanking me. Oh, that's okay then, right? Sorry to have bothered you. Story 53. Telling a girl, that was a friend of mine, that her new boyfriend, who was also a friend of mine, wasn't attracted to her until she would lose weight. And his goal is to get you to lose weight, because he said he knows you'll be knockout then. She didn't believe me. A month later, she said she can't believe it's true, and wished she would have believed me. He left her cause he told her she wasn't losing weight. Story 54. Oof, I had to tell my friend her designer bag was a fake after she spent way too much on it. She had no clue, and I felt so bad breaking it to her, but I didn't want her to keep bragging about it. Definitely an awkward moment. Story 55. Had to be the one to tell my wife that her favorite uncle died about 90 minutes before we walked down the aisle. She took it extremely well in the moment, but then it all sunk in a few hours later. Story 56. I had a friend of 40 years explain to me about immigrants and the damage they do. I guess she forgot my father was an immigrant, my husband was an immigrant, and my daughter-in-law is an immigrant. Story 57. My fiancé died a few months before our wedding. He had a life insurance policy through work and I was the sole beneficiary. I offered to use some of the money to pay for his funeral. His sister, who was unemployed, called to inform me they were going to use all of the insurance money to pay off my fiance's house so she could live there. She didn't even ask, she simply felt entitled to all of the money. I had to inform her I would not be giving her a free place to live.